love goes further than me. Love goes further than ourselves. But it also means we have to be able to connect with that in ourselves enough to let ourselves go. Friend, here's something I don't know if you know. While the podcast was a thought of mine for a long time, thinking of me absolutely could not be doing this without our very own Wizard of Oz, Kyle, at Goodnight Podcasting Solutions. Kyle's turnaround time, dedication and level of service means that I never have to second guess or worry about the level of support in getting our messaging out to you. If you're curious as to starting your own podcast or just want to see how it might spread your message, reach out to Kyle at kylegoodnight.com or check our show notes. I mean it when I say that we couldn't be doing this without him. Hello, and welcome to today's episode of the Thinking of Me podcast. Happy Tuesday, happy Thoughtful Tuesday. Excited to be talking this week about all things thoughts after our Women Who Thrive Summit, our first live podcast event that was on last Thursday, the day before Valentine's, February the 13th, with our women-only guest speakers, some of whom were on season 1 of the podcast, some of whom are to come on to season 2 of the podcast. And really and truly, if you missed it, there's still a chance to go back and access the replay in our community platform. So if you go to thinkingofmecoaching.com/summit, you'll get to access the registration link inside our community for free, where you can watch the 2 hours back of all the nuggets and insights. And today, as I say, that's kind of mostly where my thoughts are centered. And I thought I'd bring a few key takeaways from the event so that you can access some of those thoughts right now, because what we really realized is that thriving doesn't always mean being at a certain level. Thriving sometimes means in the dip points and knowing that we can take a rest as a woman. Thriving doesn't always mean what someone else thinks or expects of us. We can define our own meaning of thriving, and that sometimes, and as Naomi brought to us, that breaking open doesn't mean that we're breaking down. It just means that we're changing, we're transforming. So today I'm going to bring a few of those amazing nuggets, golden nuggets of journeys, of inspiration, of exploration, and really examples of women who decide that they're going to thrive and commit to themselves. And thinking of me is in how can I be better? Because when I'm better, my relationships are so much better. And we all really agreed on that on Thursday. And my thoughts before I dive into sharing some of the summit takeaways very much this week were kind of twofold around Valentine's, and happy belated Valentine's, friends, but also with my granny, who was always the woman who thrived in my youth and would look up to. And the two are connected because there was such a high after the summit and in the lead up to, and I had goosebumps, genuinely. The connection, even through a virtual screen with girls who are never in the same room together, it was really powerful. And on Friday then, a little bit of adrenaline come down, and while there's still work for doing and thriving still to be had in moving now, thinking of me forward, and the outpour of feedback from people who really got something out of it and really enjoyed it, I couldn't help but reflect on not only where I am, but also where I've been. And without going back through past stories, there's Valentine's and seasons of life. And Valentine's just another day, really. But it is a way to mark and acknowledge the people in our lives. And as I say, without going back through past stories or that, I am single. And I'm also the most connected I've been than even times when I was in a relationship. And what I mean by that, for anyone listening, is sometimes as a woman particularly, we can feel very isolated and unconnected, even though we've no quote unquote reason to be and to feel that way. So I was reflecting a little bit on that, and at the same time, I'm at home at the moment, and if you're watching this back as well as listening, you'll see I'm in my scatty kind of an office where I like to keep all my trains of thought on paper and everything kind of around me. In being home I've reflected on this a couple of times across the season where you can see full circle moments happen. And I used to think that I was on borrowed time. And by that, I mean, there'd only be a certain amount of time before age catches up. And my own age, but also the age of family members, where extra care would be needed. And maybe that would mean a change to my freedom, quote unquote. And Valentine's night was a good example of that, where there was extra need, and the reality of how much extra need there is for a loving connection, for someone I love and people I love and love friends. And we know that there's many forms of love, but love goes further than me. Love goes further than ourselves. But it also means we have to be able to connect with that in ourselves enough to let ourselves go. Now, what I mean by that is even at the summit, Saoirse shared one thing where she said she thought if she could control her situation, then she'd be able to hide it and no one would know or judge, and she'd feel more confident. But she realised that nobody actually cared. Her partner still loved her. Her children admire her. And as she found her own self-acceptance and her own self-love, she's thriving, and she's bringing that now to other women. So that's where the concept of it begins with me really comes from. And I feel sorry sometimes for not being able to connect that to people I love when I see them not connect with themselves and not feel like it's okay to put yourself first sometimes. And equally then, as I say, finding the balance of letting go of yourself then to be there when you're needed. And I'm really seeing that where I know I haven't shown up in relationships in the past because of my own fear of being in my own head. I know where I haven't been there for family members or friends who've needed me because I've been too busy doing my own thing. And it is something that's an area of work for me that is a continual bringing back to consciousness and changing the habit, changing that pattern. Because people do want to connect. And again, before I dive straight into kind of just a few takeaways from the summit that you can practically use today, the thought that changed my whole pattern was, well, is it me or is it the relationship? What kind of woman do I want to be? And remembering that people do actually want, as I say, to connect with me, but that I'm not, even though I can be, I'm not just annoying people. And I share that part of my story and my thoughts this week so that maybe you can reflect a little with where yours are at. And with the summit, as I say, the girls just blew it away, between all things definition of thriving to Alex's key takeaway that our stories are the same. You know, she really got into the idea that we're all at different points of the journey, but we're all on the same journey, especially as women. We all have our own struggles, our own different unique situations, but we go through the same experience. And to hear her reflection on that was just something else. Being able to know that we're there, we're connected, everything lined up and synchronized so that we were the ones in the room. You know, the people who were there as speakers to share on the night, the friends who were in the chat blowing it up genuinely from all over the world that were watching and engaged with us were meant to be there. And Naomi sharing that feeling of knowing that this was meant to happen as it was meant to happen. Just that's the point I got goosebumps. I won't lie. That, as you say, you're not falling apart. Maybe you're cracking open. You're never less than, and you're never too far gone. That kids don't see our flaws. They just love us as they are. That it's okay to stop picking myself apart that sometimes we're just one mindset shift away, the tiniest little shift in a different direction, because our thoughts affect our actions, which affect our feelings, that our internal world is all that we're left with, that we can't control the external world. I could go on and on. I've pages here of notes of, as I say, lived wisdom, not content, lived wisdom from our girls. And as I say, I'd really encourage, if you haven't got to listen to it yet, do go, take the time. And even if it was something that you stacked alongside your steps, I would have shared in season 1 where podcasts for me really were when I was getting my steps and getting a bit of movement and just trying to hit a bit of a reset button. Go and tune in if you want to hear not just how, but why this kind of sharing is so important. And inside the community is also where you can access the details of our next upcoming events, where our trainings happen, where our group coaching program is, and whatever way you want to stay connected through us and through Thinking of Me. I'm really grateful at the point that we're at right now with not just Thoughtful Tuesday and the likes of the podcast, but the people we're really beginning to connect with on a deep level, and the change that we're really starting to see happen. So I'll leave it there because I've a lot more thoughts I could continue on with, but I'll leave it there for today. And I'll close on one final share that, as a takeaway from the summit, was that if I'm more authentic, that I can be more authentic, then I can do and feel my own thoughts. And by that, friend, if we don't have to think about who we are, if we just are ourselves, that's where the magic happens. And if there's something we want to achieve that feels completely distant from us, that we're trying, and as Andrea shared, you know, we're failing and we're trying and we're failing and we're keeping going and we're persistent until we succeed, maybe there is something that just has to shift. Maybe we do have to stop and think about it for a moment and think about it in a new way. But that doesn't mean that we can't be us. We could just be us in a new level, show up in a new way if we're trying to get new results. I'll leave it with those thoughts. You know where to find the Summit Replay access. Really grateful for all things, as I say, Thoughtful Tuesday. Our newsletter comes out every Tuesday if you haven't subscribed. And a big thank you again as a shout out to Kyle at the podcast, because none of this would happen if we hadn't have reached out and said, I'm doing this and I'm doing this before I'm ready. And it's the times when we do things before we're ready that we really grow. Have a great week, friends, and talk soon.